The Real Valjean. Why was he so obsessed with escaping? For those of you who are frequent prison breakers, okay, hopefully none of you are, you probably know that the most famous escape enthusiast in history is Jean Valjean. Across the 1,000+ pages of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, Valjean manages to escape, or attempt to escape, the galleys 4 separate times. But here's the thing, his success rate was actually pretty terrible. He got caught every single time, and every time he was dragged back, the authorities added more years to his sentence. It started with 5 years for a loaf of bread, and by the time he finally walked out, 19 years of his life had vanished. So, the obvious question is, why was he so obsessed with escaping? Why couldn't he just keep his head down, serve his time, and get out in 5 years? Was he just stubborn? Or was there something much darker at play? Today, we're going to dive into the psychology of the escape, the brutal reality of 19th century French law, and why, for someone like Valjean, just serving your time was never actually an option. To understand why Valjean kept running, we first have to look at the place he was running from, the Bagne of Toulon. This wasn't a modern prison with cells and a library. This was a floating hell. Convicts were chained together in pairs, 24 hours a day. You ate, worked, and slept bolted to another human being. Your name was taken away. You were just a number. Valjean was 24601. In this environment, the law wasn't trying to rehab you. It was trying to break you. In the book, Hugo describes Valjean's internal transformation. When he first enters the galleys, he is a sobbing, broken man. But year after year, the sobbing stops and the resentment starts. He looks at society and realizes that the contract is broken. Society didn't protect him when he was starving. It didn't feed his sister's children. So, when the state says, you must serve 5 years to pay your debt, Valjean's internal logic says, I owe you nothing. You are the one who stole my life. This brings us to his first escape attempt in his 4th year. He almost made it, but they caught him in 36 hours. That one act of defiance added 3 years to his sentence. 2 years later, he tries again. Caught. 5 more years. Then another attempt, and another. By the end, he's served 19 years for a crime that should have been a misdemeanor. Now, from a logical standpoint, this looks like a series of bad decisions. But from a human standpoint, these escapes were his only way of proving he was still alive. In a system designed to turn you into a beast of burden, running away is the only way to reclaim your soul. It's an act of existential rebellion. Valjean wasn't just running toward freedom, he was running away from becoming a thing. But there's a deeper, more systemic reason why he couldn't just serve his time. And this is where we get into the grim reality of 19th century France and the Napoleonic Code. At the time, the French legal system was terrified of the dangerous classes. After the French Revolution, the people in power, the bourgeoisie, were paranoid. They saw the poor not as citizens, but as a latent volcano that could erupt at any moment. Because of this, the law created the concept of recidivism. The idea was that once a person committed a crime, they were biologically or morally tainted forever. This is why they branded convicts. Until 1832, they would literally press a red-hot iron into your shoulder, searing the letters T.F. Travaux forcés into your skin. Even after the branding iron was put away, they replaced it with the yellow passport. This was a document that every freed convict had to carry. It was bright yellow, intentionally designed to stand out. Everywhere Valjean went, he had to show this paper to the police, to innkeepers, to employers. It was a digital brand before digital existed. Think about the logic here. If the state tells you that even after you serve your 19 years, you will never be allowed to have a job, never be allowed to stay in a hotel, and always be watched by the police, then what is the point of serving your time? The second chance was a myth. The system was designed to keep you in a loop of poverty and crime, so they had an excuse to put you back in chains. Valjean realized very early on that the law had no intention of ever letting him go. His escapes weren't just about leaving a building. They were a rejection of a system that had already pre-written the rest of his life as a tragedy. Interestingly, Hugo based Valjean on several real-life figures. most notably a man named Eugène-François Vidocq. Now, Vidocq was the ultimate escape artist. He was a convict who escaped from multiple bagnes, often using elaborate disguises. But Vidocq's life shows us the only real way a convict could survive in that era. He eventually had to join the police. He eventually became the father of modern criminology and the head of the Sûreté, which was France's first ever undercover criminal investigation agency. Think of it as the 19th century ancestor of the FBI. Hugo took Vidocq's story and split it. He gave Vidocq's strength and criminal past to Valjean, but he gave Vidocq's police brain and obsession with the law to Javert. In the real world, someone like Vidocq had to become a hunter to stop being the hunted. But Valjean takes a different path, the path of the saint. He tries to prove that a man can be redeemed without becoming a tool of the state. This leads us to the climax of the book, which isn't actually the 1789 French Revolution. That's a common mistake. It's the June Rebellion of 1832. This was a smaller, failed uprising in Paris. Why does Hugo put Valjean at the barricades? Because the barricade is the only place where a man with a yellow passport can stand as an equal to a student or a worker. The rebellion was the voice of the miserables, the people for whom the law had failed. When Valjean stands on that barricade, he isn't just fighting for a new government. He's fighting against the architecture of social death. He's fighting against a world that says your past is a permanent cage. So, why was he so obsessed with escaping? Because in 19th century France, justice was a one-way street. The law was a wall, and the only way to be a human being was to find a crack in that wall and run through it, even if you knew you'd eventually be caught. When we look at our world today, the Bagne is gone, and the yellow passport has been replaced by background checks and digital records. But the question remains the same. Do we actually believe in second chances? Or have we just found more sophisticated ways to brand the people we've decided don't belong? Valjean's obsession with escaping wasn't a sign of his criminality, it was a sign of his hope. He refused to accept that a loaf of bread was worth the rest of his life. He ran because he believed that somewhere, beyond the reach of the law, there was a thing called grace. And in the end, that was the only escape that actually worked. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this dive into the psychology of the world's most famous convict, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep exploring the stories that light up the darker corners of our history. See you at the next Lighthouse.